Today, we focus on education here in Charlotte and learning development for our students, only on A Healthier Charlotte. Today on the show, we will dive into a debate on education and learning, but rather than looking at it as a current event, we'll look at learning as a social and psychological process while we explore what it will take to get young people learning and improving in the classroom. And let's go right to the panel today and meet our guests. First up on the far end of the table is Dr. Bill Anderson, a former teacher and the executive director of MEC Ed. Next to him, Lee Henderson is senior program manager at Smart Start of Mecklenburg County. And finally, Dr. Craig Pullman, next to me, is the director of Mind Matters over at Southeast Psych. Craig, you are the 15th person from Southeast Psych to be on this show. You're in good company.
Excellent.
And welcome, everybody. Thank you all for joining us. Dr. Pullman, let's start with you and look at some of the psychological perspective. Frame the issue of learning and education in the context of learning development for young people. What does it mean when we talk about learning development? What are we looking at psychologically, and how does a young person develop learning optimally?
Well, what are we not looking at? I mean, it covers so much ground. You actually, you have your academic skills. Kids need to be able to read. They need to be able to read for comprehension as well as decode. They need to be able to write, perform math operations. They need to be able to reason, and then generalize those skills to real-life applications.
Yeah.
So that's really important. But you also have the social-emotional development, and schools and education in general needs to promote that. We need to have kids who feel good about themselves, are good at interacting with each other, with collaboration, and have healthy lifestyles as well. We need to promote fitness and health education. So there's a lot for education to accomplish.
When we talk about a lot, Dr. Anderson, yes, where do we begin to prioritize? Because this is a lot of things going on, a lot of things, and resources are pulled in different directions, specifically in public school. So are we prioritizing right now? I mean, do we need to prioritize more or less on reading or arithmetic or social skills? Where do we find that priority?
I think going back to what Craig said early on, the development of young minds is absolutely critical. And I think from an education perspective, that language development is really the key. Kids who are read to, kids whose parents have a extended vocabulary, parents who have music in the house, stimulating the brain is absolutely incredible. And the differences between those kids whose brains are stimulated between birth and age 5 and those who aren't and sit in front of a TV and aren't exposed to different rich learning experiences often come to school way behind.
Does the kind of music matter? Can they listen to classical or rap music?
You know, I'm not an expert on that, but I think probably classical might be better.
Well, Lee, how do we know which programs and maybe which things are best for our children? I mean, you guys work specifically with younger kids. I mean, that's Smart Start. Is it best to immerse kids in a variety of environments? Is it best to focus on maybe one thing or one tool at a time? How do we begin that process with really young kids?
Well, I want to open to say that Smart Start has identified that we have 2,000 days between when a child is born and when they enter kindergarten. And that may sound like a long period of time, but there is so much that needs to happen to build the foundation that prepares them to learn.
Yeah.
We need to develop their social and emotional skills. We need to develop their relationships with others. And it's really important to know that young children need to learn through play. So much of what they are learning happens in the play arena. They need to be outside, they need to be walking and learning, they need to be in a nurturing, loving situation with caregivers, whether they're parents, whether they're in a child care center, whether they're with a relative. It just needs to be very nurturing and very stimulating, and keeping it fairly basic, focusing on the very important skills that they need to develop for a strong foundation for learning.
Now, I always, whenever I prepare these questions, I always think about going one direction, but all three of you said something that I didn't think about in preparing these, and that's the social skills, the communication part. I thought about reading and writing and test scores and stuff. Dr. Pullman, how can we quantify communication skills in kids? I mean, is there a number that we can look at? Is there a certain level of proficiency they can ascertain? How do we know that we're preparing them correctly just to simply communicate before they even learn specific skills?
Those are abilities that you can definitely assess and quantify in terms of benchmarks, but also how kids compare to same age peers. Okay. So we can look at scores, but that should never be the whole answer. You also have to have a qualitative sense of how kids are doing. just a sense of where kids should be at different developmental levels. You look at receptive language as well as expressive language and how they're applying that in the social domain.
So, Lee, when we look at communication skills, what are some things that parents can do? You mentioned the importance of play, and that obviously builds them. But I mean, do we give them all Facebook accounts? I mean, how do they learn to communicate, or is it just more kind of innate and subconscious just through interacting?
We need to talk with children. We need to talk with them every minute of every day, every interaction. We need to just talk and nurture. We need to read books. We need to sing songs. We need to interact, and I think that's where we can get into trouble, is when parents are relying on something else, a tool or another person, to do those things to build their children's communication skills. It happens at home.
Well, in follow up with you, I want to ask about this in the second part of the segment, focus more, but it sounds like parents have to be very involved, which is, we know parents have to be involved, but what about families where parents are working multiple jobs, or parents don't know to be involved? What picks up the slack? I mean, is it too late by the time they get to a point where they have a teacher in school?
I think it's important to remember that a parent that is working multiple jobs and is doing lots of things can still be engaged and active in their child's life. And they can do that by making sure that wherever they are, that child is, when they're not with them, is a good nurturing environment, whether it's a child care setting, whether it's with a neighbor or a friend or a relative. They can still be offering stimulation to young children at that time. We do provide Smart Start funds, a number of programs in this community that works on behalf of children whose families are feeling the kinds of stress that the low-income social economic environment can often provide for families. And so we're funding programs that begin working with families prenatally, at birth, with teen parents, with single parents. We fund a program that works with children that language issues are particularly difficult for them because they're Spanish speaking in the home only. We work closely with Head Start in our community. We work with child care facilities. We do a lot of teacher education. There are a lot of things that we are doing behind the scenes to make sure that children are entering kindergarten ready to learn.
Absolutely.
I'd like to say that what Lee just said about what Smart Start does, it is fantastic, but it's not enough.
Yeah.
It's not nearly enough, and as we know, funding has been cut over the past several years. I'd like to tell a story. It really came full center to me a couple of years ago when I was with Communities in Schools, and I had attended an event at Christ Episcopal Church one morning, and I happened to observe a number of the children who are in their child care program, probably 2 or 3 years old, and it was really clear that these children were exposed to rich language, to reading, to music, to play, all the things that she just talked about, and these kids were, happy, moving, clearly bright children. The following day, I went to one of the pre-K programs, a CMS pre-K program off Statesville Road at one of the elementary schools, and there was a Latin American dancing program, and I happened to be sitting with a group of 4-year-olds, and there was a little boy that I got paired with who could barely talk, his movement skills were so limited, and it was because this child had not been exposed to anything. It wasn't because he wasn't of average intelligence. It was because the exposure that he had not had. So much goes back to opportunities. So much goes back to parents working 2 and 3 jobs, parents not understanding all the things they can do, young parents. So there's a real divide and a real gap between those who are able to provide these experiences and these opportunities for their children and those who are not.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because I was going to kind of ask about that, and specifically in CMS and specifically in public school, are teachers in schools, it seems like, are easy to criticize, and they're easy to criticize about funding and things, but are they getting kids in kindergarten or first grade that are already so far behind the curve, they almost have no shot with some of these kids? I hate to say it that way, but I mean, is that what they're up against right now?
I wouldn't say that they don't have a shot. I think there's always hope, but they're way behind when you compare them to those children that I observed over at Christ Episcopal Church in their daycare program.
Yeah.
They're just way, way behind, and it takes a lot of catching up. So, it's starting the race in a very different place.
Any areas specifically where we see shortcomings in CMS? I mean, are there specific communication skills that kids aren't coming in with, or specific thing that teachers are trying to focus on, or administrators are trying to focus on with kids, or does it just kind of depend school to school, kid to kid?
I really think that CMS is doing the best job that they can, but based upon the cuts that we've had class sizes increasing, the money's not being there for pre-K that we know legally are supposed to be there, and they just aren't, it's more difficult. It is more difficult to teach a larger group of kids who were way behind than it is a smaller group that have had all these experiences and rich opportunities.
And Dr. Pullman, what about for kids with special needs? We did a show on Asperger's this season. We're doing another one on autism. Very different than some of the stuff we're talking about. But how do we...
As a child, we've all heard that for years, but it is about every member of our community supporting families and children for their success, for our future.
All right, guys, stick around. I want to talk parents in the second half of the show, which I think will be interesting, and a couple other things too. But next up first, our favorite blogger, Kelly Davis, is back, and she's better than ever. She's in the kitchen cooking up healthy, easy-to-prepare meals right now, only on A Healthier Charlotte.
Hi, I'm Kelly from foodiefresh.com, and I'm here today to talk about healthy carbohydrates. Everyone loves carbohydrates in some form or another, whether it's macaroni and cheese, spaghetti, pizza crust, those types of things. But carbs have been demonized as causing weight gain and obesity and those kind of problems with health in our country. But in reality, there are a lot of great choices that you can make if you want to consume carbs, or like most of us need carbs to carry on an active life. So I'm going to share with you some of my favorite healthy carbs if you're concentrating on eating a healthier whole foods type diet. Starting off with fruits and vegetables. They're the healthiest ways that you could ever consume carbohydrates. Some have more carbs than others. For example, a banana is going to have more carbohydrates than a berry. Likewise, the starchier type vegetables like carrots and sweet potatoes are going to have more carbohydrates than, say, a piece of broccoli. So if you're looking for something to give you energy, carbohydrates are a good way to do that. And by consuming foods in their most natural state, like a sweet potato that's been baked or chopped up into sweet potato fries, or carrots, raw carrots, or cooked carrots in a stir fry, that's probably the very healthiest way to do it. Moving on, we have black-eyed peas, French green lentils, and organic garbanzo beans. This is another healthy way to get healthy carbohydrates in your diet. You can buy very conveniently cans of beans to add to salads or to make into chili or eat as a side dish or a main dish. But you can also buy, this is probably the cheapest way to do it, to buy beans and lentils and peas dried, and you can store them in jars like this or in Tupperware containers, and you can soak them in overnight and boil them the next day, or cook them in a crock pot, which is my very favorite way to do it because it kind of takes all the extra work out of it. The benefit to this not only is that it's cheaper, but there's no added sodium, so you're really controlling what you put into your diet when you cook with the dried beans. And moving along, I have several different types of grains. This is another healthy way to get carbohydrates in your diet in a healthy way. This is red quinoa. You can see I've been into it. It's open. You can also buy yellow or white quinoa. Brown rice, which is a better alternative than white rice. It's rice in a more natural state. It has more fiber, and it's more filling because of that. And then this is millet. It's a gluten-free grain that I eat kind of like rice. I'll cook it in some vegetable broth and put some herbs and different vegetables, maybe even a little bit of feta cheese or some goat cheese in it. It's a really delicious way and an alternative to, you know, if you're getting sick of eating rice every day and sweet potatoes, it's a good way to kind of mix it up. And this is, you know, two of the things I eat a lot for breakfast. I have oatmeal, which is actually, this particular brand is a combination of rye, barley, oats, and wheat. So I'm getting all different types of grains in there. And then this is steel cut oats, which is a slightly less processed version of oatmeal. They're both great, healthy ways to include some healthy carbs in your diet, especially for breakfast. The last things I have here are more processed, healthy alternatives. You know, if this is the most whole foods way to go about it, the healthiest way, these are not unhealthy, but they are more processed. And if I was going to buy more processed things, this is what I would purchase. This is brown rice pasta. It's gluten-free, and I don't have a problem with gluten, but if you do have an issue with gluten sensitivity or celiac disease, this is a great alternative to regular pasta. Also, it's made with brown rice, like what I have right here, which is a better alternative to using pasta made with white flour. This is brown rice cakes, and literally has 2 ingredients: organic whole grain brown rice and sea salt. And like most people know, but it's always good to hear it again, the least amount of ingredients a product has, the better it is for you in most cases. And so this is a pretty good alternative for a processed carbohydrate. And then this is one of my favorite types of crackers because they're really nice and crunchy. They don't have a lot of added salt or flavor, so I get to dip it in whatever I want and flavor it how I prefer. You can see I've already been into it because I really like them. And then lastly, if I'm going to purchase a processed bread product, wrap, sandwich bread, hamburger rolls, I'm usually going to purchase the Ezekiel products because they're made with sprouted whole grain. They're the least processed, I think, of pretty much anything you find in the grocery store. So you can see if you're trying to cut out the unhealthy carbs in your diet, if you're trying to cut out the unhealthy processed foods, there's still a lot of great alternatives, things you can do to keep carbohydrates in your diet so you feel full and you have energy, which is what carbohydrates give us, and you won't go hungry.
Welcome back into A Healthier Charlotte and part 2 of our focus on education and learning development. And let's jump back right into it. And Dr. Pullman, I'm going to ask you the million-dollar question. How do parents play a role? We know it's a lot. If you get it right, I'll give you $1 million.
I'll take half that in cash.
How do parents play a role here? Because we know they're important. We've talked about it in the first segment, but what does it really mean? I mean, where can they help young people develop, especially now maybe during the summer when school's not in session?
One thing is that I love the 2,000-day idea that Lee shared, and you know that's a critical time, and it may seem overwhelming to parents, but and it is really important. But one of the things we can tell them is that you can do this in a fun way.
Yeah.
And a lot of the activities that help kids develop multiple areas. For example, you can read to a child, and that develops receptive language. You can talk about the book with the child, and that can develop their expressive language, their communication. And that book could also be about something that has to do with social situations and solving problems. That develops reasoning, that develops social skills. So one activity can hit a lot of different areas.
I'm curious about this when we talk about books. I think about the technology, the movies, the iPads, all sorts of stuff. Obviously, there's going to be good apps and bad apps and whatever. Is there a way to delineate between the two and know that this digital thing is good for kids and this digital one is bad? I mean, how do parents navigate that world?
That's a really good point. I think we're just scratching the surface with what technology can do. I think we're going to see, we're already seeing a revolution in literacy instruction through technology, because learning to read, there's nothing like a paper book.
Yeah.
But you don't want to replace that entirely. But you can have a reading application on a screen where the word that is read by a digital narrator gets highlighted, and that just solidifies that sound symbol correspondence. You get a lot of different, you get visual supports, and those types of apps are coming. So I think we're going to see more of that technology and more guidelines, maybe even application
and more studies
for studying the application, for rating the application.
So maybe keep the kids off Twitter when they're before 4 or 5 years old.
I would at least tell 6.
Well, Dr. Anderson, are parents the number one reason, the number one predictor of a student's success or failure, or Is it just one in a myriad of factors?
Actually, there was a study done by the Rand Corporation over a decade ago that said it wasn't necessarily a parent, but it was a significant adult in the life of the child. We tend to think that children who don't come from two-parent families don't have as good a chance, and that's not the case. You need to have a significant adult who pays attention to the child, is interested in their life, and understands the importance of providing those opportunities. If I could comment just a moment about the question earlier, I think one of the challenges we face, especially with children, low-income children, is the television sometimes becomes the babysitter.
Yeah.
And the television makes the mind turn kind of numb. So we need to provide interactive opportunities for children. So the advice to parents is it might be an app, it might be a book, but it's got to be interactive. You can't just sit there and look at something because then your brain doesn't work as hard.
I'm glad you mentioned television because when I was a kid, and I'm not that old, I'm 25. When I was a kid, I mean, not too many years ago, before some of these apps and before some of these digital things, my parents were very involved and very active, and I did summer camps and I did, baseball and all sorts of sports. Lee, when we look at kids now in summer break, maybe specifically low-income kids, what is the challenge with summer break? Is that a complete loss of valuable time for these kids who are being stuck in front of the television? And then do we end up taking September, October, November to reacclimate them into school the next year?
Well, I think absolutely anything that's at rest, it takes a period of time to rebuild. But a summer break can be a wonderful time for children to get to do other things, have other opportunities, be stimulated in a lot of different ways. And so I think that it's a great time for parents to be involved and for other people to be involved in children's lives besides the formal school setting, because it's not just about learning in a classroom setting. It's about learning all the time.
Well, Dr. Anderson, what do we do if we have low income or not, if we have kids who don't have that access to parents and adults who are active and can learn in the non-classroom setting? Do we go to year-round schooling so we know they're getting stimulation? I mean, what's the solution to not let kids... We can't ever save every kid from falling through, but what's the solution to really make a difference for a lot of these at-risk kids?
To answer your previous question, students that don't have experiences in the summer, regression does take place.
Okay.
Year-round school is something
about a month. They lose about a month of instruction, mostly for factual knowledge.
Right.
Reading stays a little more stable because kids can read more in the summer, but a lot of parents aren't tutoring their kids in math. So,
But to answer your question about year-round school, probably a quick history lesson is needed here.
Yeah.
We tried that over a decade ago in CMS, and it failed kind of miserably. And the reason that it failed is because year-round school is not really year-round school. You would go for 9 or 10 weeks, and then you take 3 weeks off. So the challenge that parents had is what were they going to do with their children during those 3-week off times? And the parents that could afford childcare, it worked for them. But for the parents who couldn't, it didn't. So the year-round school model is a little bit flawed because it's not really year-round.
So what's the divide here? Excuse me. Is it the same divide we see in a lot of other maybe social issues? Is it racial, economic, socioeconomic? I mean, are we looking at the same divide with parents who can provide and parents who can't provide?
I think we are.
Yeah.
To admit that that's not in place would be naive. I think it's less racial and it is more economic. Those who don't have the means to provide these opportunities, it's so much about experiences. It's so much about opportunities. You mentioned earlier that your parents made sure you did lots of different things.
And I turned out great.
Yeah, that helped you to develop to the person you are. But when you come into school a year or 2 or 2.5 behind your peers, it's tough. And then teachers have to differentiate instruction, provide individual instruction to bring kids up. So it is more difficult.
So it is I mean, well-off children, well-off parents are likely going to have better experiences with kids.
The number one most important factor in successful schools is upper middle class families.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Pullman, what's the solution to the divide? Maybe not from a social perspective, but even just a clinical, psychological perspective. Programs, summer programs, reading programs, I'm sure all take place, but how do we broaden that out and really affect kids and affect young people so that their future is not in doubt just because of maybe where they grew up?
I think we have to think globally and then act locally.
Yeah.
I mean, globally, absolutely, we have to invest more. We have to provide. We try to how to balance the playing field. Really good points brought up here. But in terms of the family that's right now lower on the SES scale, what do they do with their kids? There are things that they can do that don't require a lot of money. You don't have to send your kid off to science camp and spend hundreds of dollars for that. You can have science experiments in your kitchen.
Yeah.
You can introduce science while you're cooking. You can you can journal things. You can if you can follow a sports team. You can have math instruction and math tutoring that way. So, you know, if we can give some practical ideas that don't cost a lot of money and are easy and fun, that gives parents something to hold on to.
Yeah. Dr. Anderson, what is on this topic, on learning development, on kind of early childhood education, what's the big monster laying in wait in CMS? I mean, is there anything in public schools locally that we can kind of be on the lookout for in the future, or is it just general stuff that we've talked about now?
We need to provide more seats for children to have pre-K opportunities.
Okay.
You know, those are 4-year-olds. We need to provide, we know the kids are there. We know the kids need the services. We just need to have the funding. And it really comes down to money. And money also means politics.
Yeah.
And do we have a legislature that's willing to invest in our people? It's like the old Fram oil filter commercial. You're pretty young, so you might not remember this, but it was pay me now or pay me later. It's such a simple equation.
Yeah.
You either do it now or you're going to pay later a whole lot more.
Well, and not to get into too political of a discussion, that's a whole different show. But what's the holdup here? I mean, why, maybe not why is there a regret or resistance to early childhood education, but what's the bigger picture? I mean, is it just that politicians and constituencies may not understand the value in something like early childhood education?
I think they don't understand the value, and I think that right now in Raleigh, there is a belief that there's some really simple solutions to things, and that if you cut the fat, that's going to solve the problem. And these are not simple. These are complex issues. But the reality is we have the haves and the have-nots, and it's in everybody's best interest that we're able to provide more for those kids who live in poverty before they get to school.
Lee, take it from there. When Smart Start works, I mean, are you optimistic of the future? I know funding is always an issue, especially in a bad economy, and some of these political issues seem to be significant problems. What does the future look like for you guys? 10 years from now, 20 years from now, do you think you'll be affecting the amount of young people you want to affect?
We keep hoping that we can capture the attention of the legislators. We go over on a regular basis to do advocacy for young children and help the people that are making the decisions about where dollars are going in communities understand the value of early care and education, health, and family support. I think we feel hopeful, but perhaps a little discouraged right now.
Yeah.
We've sustained huge budget cuts, about 20% last year alone. And so we're no longer able to fund as many programs as we were previously funding. We're not able to fund as many subsidized care slots, which are putting children in 4- and 5-star centers, which is the quality, it speaks to the quality of the education for their early childhood experience. As those dollars go away, what's happening to those children? They are then languishing, perhaps, in our community in non-stimulated, non-productive environments. And that's where we begin to see the huge discrepancy between children entering kindergarten ready to learn and those that are not.
It's the phrase, this may sound extreme, but fund education now or fund prisons later. That's almost what we're talking about.
You're
Absolutely.
right.
And if you want to look at another little piece of history, when Jim Hunt was our governor 2 decades ago, he worked very hard as the education governor to increase funding for our schools.
Yeah.
And at the end of his tenure, North Carolina was ranked 28th in the nation in per pupil expenditures for our students. We're now ranked 46th in the nation. That's not a good marker. So to answer your question, I'm not very hopeful. I'm not sure that our legislators understand that it's in their best interest that we take care of all children.
Yeah. Dr. Pullman, let's end on a little more positive note. not to go sunshine and rainbows, but this is an interesting discussion. But what about parents? I mean, if a parent sees this and gets mad at their local legislator, what do? How can a parent right now involve their kid and engage their kid? Is it just as simple as being engaging and interacting with them?
I think be creative, be willing to try different things, and put thinking ahead of non-thinking.
Yeah.
You know, if as a practical matter you need to use television to have the kids calm down while you're making dinner and it's been a long day, choose something that's going to be interesting to talk about when dinner's actually on the table. That type of thing. So, you know, if you got a few minutes in the car, rather than having your own music station on, put on the news and talk about it.
Yeah.
Talk about it with your kid. There are opportunities to develop thinking and learning in everyday life that everybody can use.
I like that. We'll end on that one. Thank you all very much for a really interesting discussion. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And that's it. That's all the time we have this week on A Healthier Charlotte. I want to remind all of you that you can go to cltblog.com for more unique news and information and current events here in the Queen City that you can't get anywhere else, and a lot on education. And for our guests on the panel and for our crew here in the studio, thank you so much for joining us this week. And I'm here to remind you that as you go along, you don't need talent, you just need courage. And this has been A Healthier Charlotte.